You're all very welcome to this workshop in Alchemical art. It's part of an outdoor play conference, and we're filming here on the Woodland Trail in the Mayo campus in GMIT, which we use for a lot of outdoor education and early childhood outdoor play kind of activities. So I'm just going to give a brief introduction of what we're going to do today, and then we're going to get stuck in. So basically, alchemical art is probably not a term that most people are familiar with, but it's basically a mix of alchemy and art. So the philosophy and mysticism and spirituality of alchemy we're not going to be using today, but the basic idea of transforming one material into another material and the kind of, experimentation and observation is something we're going to draw on. So really today is a mix of using some basic physical science techniques in order to create material that we can then use to create art. Okay? So the two activities we're going to do today is, one, we're going to transform the earth beneath our feet into clay, from modelling clay. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to take some living willow branches and transform them into carbon for making sketching pencils with. Okay, so that's basically it. I think we just get stuck into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to transform some earth into clay. So this is a really engaging activity for a young child. It's really a kind of type of messy play. So they get to do lots of different things. So they get to dig up the earth, they get to put it into buckets, they get to mix water with it, they get to sieve it, they get to pour it. So in terms of an activity, it's a really, really engaging activity for a young child. And I've found when I've done this with young children that they tend to almost enjoy the activity of making clay just as much as the modelling and the artwork that comes after the clay. So there's a couple of things we need in order to make some clay, and these are all basic household items, okay? So there's no reason to go out and spend a fortune on these items. So the two kind of fundamental things we need, of course, is just containers. So effectively, in order to make clay, we have to extract some earth, and then we have to extract the clay from the earth, okay? So we need an initial container. This is just a mop bucket in order to put the clay into, or put the soil into, okay? We need some sort of digging instrument. So I've bought a proper shovel, but again, for a young child, if depending on where they're digging, they can just use a trowel like this. Or alternatively, just give the child the bucket and say, bring me back some earth, and let the child come up with whatever creative way they want to use to gather the actual soil. So that will usually involve getting a stick maybe and to poke the ground and to pick it up with their fingers, okay? So the other thing that we need then is basically some sort of net or a sieve, okay? So this is just basically a kind of a butterfly net. It's a bit light, but it will do. This is a bit sturdier, so this is, again, it's a project to itself. So basically what we have here is we have some young willow saplings that we've just basically bound into a ring, and then we've just basically stitched this net onto this particular ring. This net is from a bag of kindling sticks, okay? The other net you could use is an onion bag that, and the vegetable kind of nets that you get. They're perfect, and they're a nice little project as well. The final thing then that we need is a finer way of catching the clay. So again, this is just an old bit of bed linen, you can use an old t-shirt or anything like that, and that just is the final process. On top of that then, the only other thing that we need is water, okay? So that's basically all the things we need to make clay. So we're going to get Luke to fill up a bucket about maybe 3/4 full with just soil that we can find locally. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get Ali to pour in water pretty much to the top of the bucket. She's going to start agitating and mixing, and what we want to do is we want the really fine clay particles to get mixed up in the water, okay? So we might get her to actually put her hands into the bucket and squeeze it and actually try to extract as much clay as possible. Once we've done that and we've agitated the mix, then what we're going to do is we're going to probably get Luke to pour the bucket back into the other container, but we're going to sieve it. And what we're going to do is we're going to remove any kind of heavy material, any stuff that hasn't been broken down. So what we should end up with is one container that just has water and clay particles. That's it for it all in. So we just want to rub and just try to get as much of that water through the net, just to extract as much clay from the soil as possible. Again, if we had time, you could just let that drip. But for now, we'll just give it a bit of a move around. Okay. And then any excess matter we can actually just put back into the hole we dug in order to actually extract the soil in the first place. So we now have a bucket full of clay mix with water. So what I'm going to do is, just for illustrative purposes, I'm just going to spill some of this water into this clear container so you can actually see what's happening when we leave it settle. Okay, so that's basically the process for now, right? You need to sit and this needs to settle. So making clay as opposed to the charcoal is a longer process, and what I usually do is I usually kind of make the clay one day and then maybe introduce the clay to the kids the next day. So you want this bucket to sit for at least 45 minutes, and then what we'll do is we'll siphon off the clear water from the top, and we can repeat that process for quite some time before we go into the final kind of process. Now that we've allowed the mixture to settle, you can see here that the kind of finer clay particles are beginning to settle on the bottom, and we just have the excess water then on top. So the first thing we need to do is just very slowly just kind of pour the top of it, trying to make sure that we don't actually take the rest of it with us. Okay, so we're going to do that with the large bucket as well. And what I would recommend is that you might do that process maybe 2 or 3 times. So you could let that sit again for another 40 minutes and then take off the excess water. You're trying to get rid of as much of the water and leave as much of the clay particles as possible before we finally go into the last process. So I'm just going to do the same with this bucket here. Okay, so I can just see it's just beginning, the sediments, it's just getting darker there. So again, we have a much darker colour now, and the idea would be to let that sit again for another maybe 40 minutes or thereabouts. Just for demonstration purposes, we're going to pretend that we've let the bucket settle for another maybe 45 minutes. Again, you can leave the bucket settle for a whole day and you'll come back and you can nearly drink the water from the top, it'll be crystal clear. And so if you want to do this process over a few days, that's no problem whatsoever. So after doing this a few times, we're going to now try to get rid of, or try to capture all the really, really fine particles of clay. So we've just basically used a bit of old material, tied it around the bucket, and we're just going to pour this in and just let this drip into the bucket. So again, it's no harm just to maybe give it a mix. So again, you don't want to fill up, you want to just let it settle a bit and then continue to kind of keep on adding to it. So the product we're going to end up with is the product that's sitting on top of the towel itself, okay? All the rest of the surplus water can be just discarded. Okay, so this is basically the final product. This is the clay. Again, you should be able to pick it up without it completely sticking to your hands. Again, and every kind of soil you use is going to probably have a different clay content. So some soils are going to be really rich in clay material, others are not. So again, it's just a matter of experimentation. So this is quite wet still at the moment. If you're going to use this for pottery or for sculpting, you probably want it a bit drier, okay? What we're going to do with this today is we're actually going to create some tree faces. So one method that I think is quite useful is the kind of almost just stick and gluing. So if you put this onto the surface and then actually stick stuff to it, as opposed to taking the whole lump of clay and shaping a face out of it. So we've brought in 2 artists, Ali and Luke, who are going to go ahead and try and make some nice artistic faces on trees with this stuff and other natural material they can gather. Once you actually process the clay, you want to just make sure that you keep it in an airtight container. So put it in a lunchbox, put it into a plastic bag. Once it's in an airtight container, it should keep for a couple of months. If you need to add a bit more water to it, you can. So, and even if it comes quite hard, you can just add water and mix it in again. So again, there's a pretty long shelf life with it. If you want to actually use it for pottery and for making stuff out of the clay, then you are looking at, having to heat it up and either baking it or leaving it to dry for quite some time. But you will get something quite a hard material afterwards. Okay, so now we're going to look at making charcoal pencils. So again, this is a very engaging activity to do with young kids. There's something about handing a child a cutting instrument that just basically they light up the minute they see it. So there's a kind of risky element to this as well. So the kid is just automatically engaged the minute you say go cut down a branch from a willow tree, for example. There's also a fire involved in this. So again, the fire can be quite mesmerizing, outside fires usually are. And then finally there's the process of making the charcoal with a kind of reveal of the pencils at the end. So again, another very tactile, very visceral type of play and outdoor learning in terms of child development and so forth. Like the clay, there's a science behind this as well. So again, there's something quite special happening in the process. So we're basically creating carbon from something that's living, okay? And we'll see that process in due turn. So the type of stuff that you need in order to create some kind of charcoal pencils, if you like. So the first thing you have to need is a cutting instrument. And again, it's great to be able to give the child the opportunity to cut and harvest this material themselves. So one of the things I tend to use is a little mini hacksaw. I have two versions here. This one is just way more ergonomic and it's easier for the child to hold. These ones, they'll do it a pinch, but they're not fantastic, okay? So the reason I like to use something as simple as this is it introduces a relationship with the material that the child is working with. So if they push too much, it's going to get stuck. If they don't push hard enough, it's not going to cut. So they have to build up a relationship with the material they're working with, and I think that's really a fundamental skill, and it's so fundamental to any sort of craft that they begin that kind of working relationship with the products and with the raw material. So there are your two basic options. Again, it won't cut. If it jumps onto a child's hand, it generally won't cut them. But like anything, you want to introduce good etiquette. So obviously, if they can get two hands onto a tool, then obviously they can't cut their other hand. If they have to use one hand, then the other hand, just make sure that it's a good bit away from them, okay? The other option is a secateurs, and again, most kids at this stage that you have in your care have already possibly used scissors, for example, and so this isn't far from a scissors. Obviously, it's more lethal than a scissors, but again, I think for most children, they understand the risks involved. Again, if it's a big branch that they're cutting, they may want to put two hands on the scissors, and again, that just means that the other hand is never going to get cut. If you have older kids, maybe teenagers, you could introduce something like a pruning saw, which is absolutely fine as well. This one will tend to cut a bit more, so this is definitely for older kids. Again, they can normally get two hands on the actual handle itself, and that means then that they're not having to risk the other hand. The other thing that we tend to use is a potato peeler. So we want to be able to shave the bark off the living willow. It's not fundamentally necessary. You can still get something to sketch with if you leave the bark on. But what this particular item does is it gets them used to what you would think of shaving with a knife. So that working away from their fingers, and a kind of very basic kind of something that really should become first principles when you're working with a knife. So if you're going to introduce knives later on, this is a fundamental step to making sure that they're safe. And again, they can handle it just like a knife, okay? The final thing you need something to burn the actual, we're not burning it, that's the trick of charcoal, but you need something contained the living willow that therefore is going to be placed on top of the fire, okay? So again, this is just a biscuit tin with a little hole just knocked into it, okay? You want the hole to be no bigger than the size of a pencil, okay? What you're trying to do is you're trying to ensure that the material doesn't combust. You don't want flames coming out of this hole, you just want smoke, okay? So the matter, if you like, in terms of the willow remains, but the moisture and the impurities are extracted from it. And that's it. That's pretty much what we need. Okay, so let's go harvest some willow. So the great thing about willow is that it grows back twice as vigorously, so it's a really good one to use for craft projects like this. Luke and Ali have harvested the willow. So again, what we're looking for is willow around the size of your thumb, okay? So if it's too thin, it won't be very useful, and if it's too big, it's going to take quite a long time for the process to happen. So this is Ali picked this one, a slightly thinner one, so we'll see how it works out. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to simply cut this material that's been into certain sections that will work for our So again, you can see that this process, even for myself, is quite difficult. So the hacksaw method might be a lot better, okay? So we just want to, and it really is about experimentation. We might find that these might be maybe a bit too thick. The more you gather, the more you harvest, the longer the process takes. So this is literally, you know, this isn't a lot. So if you've got a bunch of children in your care, not everyone's going to need to get hold of a stick, but you want to kind of include everyone at the same time. Okay, for today's purposes, that'll do it fine. Okay, so we want to cover that up. And what we're going to do then is we're just going to add some heat. So again, if you have a campfire, that would be the obvious thing to use, okay? But for today, I'm going to use this particular, just a worktop stove. So it's more visible in terms of the process. So what we're going to keep an eye out for is when the kind of thick smoke starts coming out of it. That's when it's really working the process. And then eventually that smoke is going to actually disappear somewhat. And it's at that point we're going to take this off the gas ring and we're going to have created our carbon, our charcoal pencils, okay? So the charcoal is a very, again, like clay modelling, it's a very old and ancient technique. And quite often it was used to create a hotter and cleaner fire, okay? We also have, there's artwork in a cave in Australia that date back, I think it's 28,000 years ago, and they've actually found charcoal being used for those particular paintings. So again, everything we're doing today is extremely ancient and it's been with us for a very, very long time. Okay, obviously if you're going to use an open fire, then obviously a good pair of work gloves are going to be quite useful for it, okay? So I'm just going to pop this on here. We're just going to leave that now. One thing I like to do is just maybe give it a bit of a shake, okay? So if you have a good set of tongs, perfect, a good set of work gloves, again, it's just to give it a bit of a rattle, just so all the pieces get charred nicely, okay? And we can still see smoke coming out of it. So we're going to just keep it going until that smoke quietens down a bit. Okay, so we've turned off the gas a while ago. We've just let everything cool down. So we allowed about maybe 35 minutes for this. So again, depending on the size and shapes, it may need a bit longer, but usually you wait until the smoke has stopped rising from the top of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and try open that. Okay, so you can see there that the larger ones didn't actually burn so well, but we've definitely got some of the smaller ones did, okay? So it's all about observation, experimentation, getting a feel for the process. Sometimes you're going to get it absolutely right first time. Other times, there's nothing stopping us from putting that back on the ring and actually just putting it back on for another 5 minutes and just to ensure that everything is done. But for the purpose of today and enough for the kids, there's enough there to be playing with. So if Luke and Ali, if you want to grab one of them, and if you just want to maybe see how to sketch on a sheet of paper. Okay, so we've just made some clay, we've made some charcoal pencils. But again, we don't need to go to such a length if you just want to draw and sketch outside using raw material. So for example, this is just the dirty clay water that we had, and this is just a normal stick. So again, just literally by sticking it in, we can just kind of draw something here, or just write. Okay, so again, we can change the sticks. Okay, we can use maybe a pine cone, spruce cone actually. Maybe to put in a thicker brush stroke. We can use some moss. So with the moss, I find it's better just to squeeze some of the excess stuff out of it. So again, maybe if you're drawing a tree and you want to just put little foliage on the trees, maybe the leaves, drawing bushes, or again, if we want to cover a lot of, literally whatever you find and just use whatever's there. It's such a simple thing to do, so you don't need to go through all the elaborate process that we've done today. If you just have good quality paper, this is cartridge paper, so it soaks in the ink itself. And from that, then it's just a matter of allowing them to just literally find a dirty puddle and give them a sheet, and actually they can start drawing and just start playing with it. So I hope you got something out of that. I hope you can use it. Again, it's all about improvisation, experimentation. Like, everything is about getting a feel for what you're working with, and really improvisation is key. The minute you go outside, all your senses are much more open, you're much more aware. The child is just so kind of drawn into these materials, whether it's the messy play, whether it's the transformation of charcoal. But again, trying to incorporate the outdoors and use the outdoors is really the key. And once a child's imagination is allowed to grow in terms of what they can use, what they can process from natural materials, it makes little to no sense to go into an art shop to buy some modelling clay or to get some pencils when you can actually do it yourself. And again, the clay can be done over a couple of days. Likewise, the charcoal, you can introduce different drawing techniques with different charcoal and so forth, and different types of materials to work with. So again, there's really no reason. Just grab a raincoat, bring them outside, and actually begin to experiment and begin to play. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.